Today, NaNoWriMo has given me the challenge of using a villain that draws mustaches on other characters in my next chapter, which is this one. This will now consist of that. There was a man, Hank. He was exploring the newly created crater where Illinois was, and he could have sworn that a cannibal was after him, so he began running. He recently watched the movie, The Hills Have Eyes. He was not into the prospect of being eaten, so he took out his pen to defend himself. The chaser was not any kind of cannibal that eats other people, for it was Detective John Hoffman. Detective John Hoffman was after this man, Hank, because he knew that recently, Hank escaped from a penitentiary in Iowa. To retrieve him before the feds had to get involved, he tracked him down to Illinois, because nobody would expect any living person there, except for those commissioned by the government to relay information back to the White House and Pentagon. Hank was just wandering, as one does in a giant crater, when he found a radioactive chunk of uranium, or as he saw it, a perfect weapon, but not as good as his pen, because this man was notorious for drawing mustaches on his victims, before ending up in the clink. He was armed with such an item, to do that kind of damage once again, and he was going to draw mustaches on people until he was able to escape the country and head over to China, where he would rule the country, after drawing a mustache on the current leader of the country, whoever that is. This kind of mincet was not tolerated, so the judge gave him a life sentence for the betterment of society. That, as we now know, did not work, because he is just running around in the Grand Crater of Illinois. In the Grand Crater, he did not know that he was being chased down by the world's second-best detective, Detective John Hoffman. John was willing to fire on sight and shoot to kill, because as a clean-shaven man, he was not willing to have a mustache drawn across the space between his nose and upper lip. It was a priority of his to shave every 10.5 minutes, so there was no way he was about to let this psychopathic maniac take advantage of him. Hank found a group of researchers digging up some samples and took each one out individually for the element of surprise to be his strong suit. Each researcher got a nice thick mustache drawn on their faces, and they were drawn in the style of Hulk Hogan's amazing mustache. They lost their research samples and dignities. Hank ran off with the radioactive materials and his Sharpie pen. He was running with his eyes closed when he tripped over a sink where Detective John Hoffman was shaving his face. Detective John Hoffman was on his break to shave his face as he does every 10 minutes and 30 seconds, as previously mentioned. It was another easy job done by Detective John Hoffman, and that is why he will end up in the history books, not that they are important or anything. Detective John Hoffman was paid a sum of $32,000 for his hard work. 20% of that money will be spent on shaving cream and razors.